Welcome everyone to New South Wales PI Dairies webinar number 10, Turning Data into Action, How a Dairy Farmer is Getting Value from Cow Production Data. My name is Nicholas Lyons. I am the Development Officer Dairy within the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. I have a national role supporting technology adoption on Australian dairy farms. And today we have the great privilege of having a young and vibrant guest speaker with us. Dr. Joe Newton works as a research scientist in dairy genetics for the Department of Economic Development, Jobs, Transport and Resources in Victoria. She currently works on Improving Herds, a national project initiated by the Gardiner Foundation that aims to equip dairy farmers with the tools and knowledge to make quick, clever decisions to increase herd performance and farm profitability. Prior to this, Jo spent 8 years based in Armidale, New South Wales, where she completed a Bachelor of Rural Science with honours and a PhD in Animal Genetics and Breeding, both at the University of New England. Jo describes herself as a city girl who fell in love with agriculture and has definitely become an advocate for agriculture's diverse and rewarding career pathways. Aside from university, she was also an Art for Agriculture Young Farming Champion, has worked on several farms in New South Wales, as well as a casual academic at UNE. Therefore, Jo has not only a wealth of technical knowledge and background, but also a lot of hands-on experience. Jo and I met at the Dairy Research Foundation Symposium Emerging Scientists Competition last year, but I've followed her research and I've worked since then. She's done a lot of interesting things in the genetics and data management topics, and that's why I thought she was going to be a great speaker for us today. So I really appreciate Jo's willingness to share with us her insights into turning data into action, how a dairy farmer is getting value from cow production data. The presentation will be mostly focused on how having access to data on milk yield, components, and somatic cell count for every cow in the milking herd can get translated into outcomes on farm. So Jo, no pressure, but I am sure you will make justice to the topic. So I will share presenter rights with you.
Thanks very much, Nico. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some of the findings from the Improving Herds project with you today. The results that I'm presenting today form a small component of a much larger project. So I thought I'd start today with a brief introduction into the project and then introduce the focus farms who've been a key part of this aspect of the project. Nico alerted me to a couple of questions that came through during the registration, so I'll clarify those before we get stuck into the focus of the talk. What did we learn from the 2015-16 season by following the journey of 7 focus farms to understand how they got value from having access to cow production data for the first time? So the Improving Herds project was initiated by the Gardiner Foundation and essentially got this goal of demonstrating how investing in herd improvement contributes to farm profit. The project has both research and extension components, hence the diversity of organisations involved in the project that you can see at the bottom of the screen. But at the heart of the project are 2 groups of focus farms: our genetic focus farms, and in these farms we're focusing on understanding how decisions made about genetics and breeding impacts on farm profit. And the herd test focus farms are our second group, and you're about to meet them. So as you can see, these 7 focus farms are quite spread around Australia. Over in WA, we've got Peter. Up in southeast Queensland, between Boonah and Beaudesert, Ruth and Jeffrey. Mark, in the Hunter Valley. Guy and Leanne out in Maffra. Cheryl and Teo down in Tassie. Josh, who farms with his family out in Colac. And Brad and Megan, who are up in northern Victoria. These farms represent different breeds, different climatic zones, different management styles. But the common thread that links them all is that through testing, for the first time ever, or the first time in quite a long time, these farms had access to individual cow production data. Each farm had a facilitator who was from their local herd test centre, who supported them through the process of monthly herd testing. to obtain this cow production data. Now, although this production data was collected from monthly herd tests, which may be different from some of you listening today with AMS systems, I think that there's really relevant points in how the focus farms were able to turn this data into valuable information for their business. So essentially what we did for the project was follow these 7 farms over the 2015-16 season, interviewing them along the way. We got access to their data and then took this mixed methods approach to bringing it all together to try and understand our question. So what data am I talking about? Well, hopefully this answers the question that came through at registration. A herd test provides for each cow in the herd her litres of milk, her milk components, so that's her fat and protein percentage, somatic cell count, days in milk, production index, amongst other traits. Now, the production index is a prediction of the cow's ranking in the herd that takes into account her breed, how many days in milk she is, whether she's first, second, third lactation animal. And then the herd summaries. This is information that's contained in a herd test report that can vary between centres in what exactly this looks like. But our key pieces of information are who the best and worst performers are in the herd, the highest somatic cell count cows, and also those herd trends over the season. In bringing everyone's stories together, what I found was that everyone had different examples of how they were able to find value in having access to cow production data. But what we did see was that this could broadly be grouped into 2 themes. The data was being used to support routine management decisions and as a tool to be able to respond quickly and confidently to some of the curveballs that the 2015-16 season threw. So I thought we'd start by having a look at what were some of these routine management decisions. The first lesson to come out of the project was that it didn't matter if you had 5 years or 35 years experience in the dairy industry. No one knew exactly who their best and worst cows were. And Brad said, you know, there was a couple of cows that were producing really good that I didn't think were, you know, they hit it pretty well. And Josh out in Westvic talked about his superstar cow who looked great, but turned out she was milking less than 10 litres. Across the ditch, Andrew Fear from LIC in New Zealand challenges farmers that think they know their cows. He says, well, if you can accurately predict the performance of your best and worst cows in the herd, he'll personally pay for the test. The fact that he hasn't had to shell out for a herd test yet, and that all 7 of these focus farms were surprised by just who their best and worst cows were, shows that, yeah, you can't always pick them. With access to cow data, Cheryl and Theo changed their drying off practice. So in previous seasons, they dried off their cows according to calving date. But the 15-16 season was a tough season and every dollar counts. And they're in a position where they had some homegrown silage on hand. So they thought, we can do things a bit differently. And they dried off the cows in batches based on who was producing less than 12 litres after each herd test, rather than just doing a blanket dry off according to calving date. With up-to-date records, Mark was able to combine his data sources and search for answers. So when he identified low-producing cows from his herd tests, he went, well, why are they low? Is it because they're in calf? And he was able to make an informed decision about what to do with those low-producing animals. If they're in calf, they might only be giving 12 litres, but they're 5 months in calf, so it's better to dry them off. And it was quite a common theme amongst the focus farms that this herd test data was being used alongside other information like the preg test results. In entering the Improving Herds project, Guy and Leanne out in Gippsland found themselves in a new position. For the first time, they had ample replacements weren't trying to build up their herd size and could look at some of the older cows and see, well, who isn't performing, who's had multiple mastitis cases, who maybe doesn't deserve a spot in the herd anymore, which was a pretty significant change from their previous culling strategy where it was pretty much only involuntary culls, so the cows that broke down or couldn't get back in calf that left the herd. So to recap these experiences, I think we can sum it up as having access to herd test data enabled these focus farms to make better and more informed drying off decisions and be more confident that they were culling the right animals from the herd. Now, I'm sure that everyone listening today knows that there's way more that you can do with herd test data that identify cows that are likely to have mastitis. But for all 7 of these focus farms, regardless of what their herd average cell count was, they said somatic cell count is one of the first things we go to when we get the reports back. And the reason is, it's one of the first things that the farmers can act on when they get this data. And as Peter explained to me during our second interview, once we get the herd recording back, I'll go through the list of anything that's over 1 million count. I'll go through first and select them out and hand test them to see if they've visually actually got mastitis. And farmers really valued being able to get the herd test results back the next morning or that afternoon and start making decisions straight away. With a whole season worth of herd test results under his belt, Guy told me in the final interview about how he could start thinking about more targeted dry cow treatments because he knew who'd had mastitis during the season. He knew what everyone's cell counts had done. So he didn't need to apply a blanket treatment to the whole herd. So you could use the cell counts as a tool for the dry cow treatments. And there's potentially some quite big savings there in the cost of the drugs. During the 2015 season, Cheryl and Teo invested $6,500 in farm infrastructure in the form of a 300 megalitre dam and 2 pivots. And the reason they did this was it was an opportunity to provide water security to the farm. And they said to prove the worth of that pivot, even though we're going to be growing extra feed, we need to have that extra data on the cows to justify it. So they saw herd testing as part of their risk mitigation strategy, but it was also something that the bank had asked for and made a condition of getting their loan. So to recap where we are now, in addition to being able to make more informed drying off and culling decisions, herds were able to better identify cows that had high cell counts and treat clinical mastitis cases as they occurred, and also think about how can I manage the herd in the long term. And Cheryl and Tia is a nice example of how using individual cow production data and having access to it can help us to make sure that we're maximising the return from the investments that we make in our infrastructure. Maybe it's not a pivot, maybe it's a new laneway or a more efficient yard setup. So being located in southeast Queensland mean Ruth and Jeffrey's herd transitions from being pretty much reliant on grass to nearly a total mixed ration over the year. And obviously there's significant challenges there in ensuring the cows get the nutrients that they need. And Jeffrey said, knowing individual results at particular times in the cow's lactation is really useful for managing diets to increase the overall production per lactation of cows. So Ruth and Jeffrey's farm is quite unique in that the dairies run alongside a beef cattle breeding operation as well. So there's significant infrastructure there for grain storage, and they actually make their own pelleted mills. So for Ruth, having access to this detailed information on what the cows were doing helped her to make sure that they were getting exactly the nutrition that they needed. So even for a farming operation in a less seasonal environment than Southeast Queensland, there's still opportunities to look at how you can take that information you're getting from the cows and make sure they're getting the nutrition that they need. There were many examples given by the focus farms on how cow production data was informing breeding decisions or being used as a way to confirm that the decisions made in the past were the right ones. So an example from Tio and Cheryl was, they said, well, we've got a lot of first lactation heifers that are going to enter the herd. So we want to keep herd testing them so that we can prioritise which heifers we then AI to sex semen or a higher value semen. And Josh said, oh, well, you know, I can have a bit of a look at my herd test results and see which traits I need to be focusing on when selecting the bulls. Do I need to be chasing a bit more protein or butterfat? And we also talked about the fact that there was an opportunity to optimise the time of joining. For the herds that were in a split or year-round calving operation, if the cow was still producing really high litres, it could be an indication that, well, maybe it's not worth breeding her yet because how likely is it that she's actually started cycling again? And use that as a tool alongside your estrus detection to see, well, is it actually worth starting to join her yet? And seeing if your genetics suit your production system, this was something that a couple of herds said to me in different ways. It was herds that had, you know, tried out a new crossbreeding system, and they said, well, we really want to be able to follow how these heifers do once they enter the dairy to see if we've made the right decisions there. Or we're using bulls from New Zealand, and are those New Zealand genetics actually suited to our system here in Tasmania? The focus farms also found that herd testing opened up access to industry tools and resources. And in our final interview, Ruth talked about how she'd been able to get a diff file from her herd test centre and generate her own mastitis focus report. And she said, you know, it was actually easier than I was expecting it to be. And the herd test data also goes into the estimation of bull and cow breeding values. And these are returned as genetic progress reports to farmers. So that's an additional resource that you get from your herd test centre as part of herd testing. And DataGene has new tools under development, like the herd test dashboard and others, which will help with this challenge of when there's so much data, how do we actually make sure that we can extract useful information that's of value to us from this great big vat of data? So we've got a couple more things to add to our list. Herd test data can assist with designing and making decisions about the breeding program, and also monitoring the decisions that we make so that we can sort of keep track of, are we doing the right thing by our farming system? That using the data and feeding it into industry tools is a great way to get valuable information that you can use to assist with the routine management decisions. A couple of herds expressed interest in this opportunity to perhaps look at preg testing from the milk sample. And this space of what more information can we get from the milk sample that we're already taking on the cows is quite an interesting one. And I think in the next couple of years, we'll see some new developments in the information that we can extract from milk spectral data. So I think that this list is only going to get longer as time goes on. But I did say that there was two main ways that cow production data was being used. And the other one was when the season throws a curveball. And a few of the curveballs that were identified by the focus farms in the 2015-16 seasons was obviously the milk price drop, but also a drought, a summer that seemed to never end, pasture shortage, and being in a situation where milk income was being reduced due to quality penalties. So Josh out in Westvic found himself in the position of having to make some difficult decisions following a drought and then the milk price drop. And he was suddenly faced with having to cull cows mid-season. And he said that without herd recording data, we would have just been guessing which cows to cull. So having access to this data in an incredibly stressful and challenging period in the season enabled Josh and his family to act quickly and confidently and find a way forwards. One of our focus farms, who had a long history of herd recording, their herd average somatic cell count had been pretty good, sitting around the 200,000 mark. But herd testing had fallen off the bandwagon during a business restructure, as can happen. But what we saw was that at the first herd test, the herd average somatic cell count was well over 500,000. And the farmer said, well, without the herd test data, I can't identify the problem ones. And he'd just seen that his cell count was climbing and climbing. And when I had a look at this farmer's data, we worked out that if we could take back control of that somatic cell count and get it back down to eliminate the milk quality penalty, it could increase the farmer's milk income by as much as 6%. What this graph shows us is the average somatic cell count at each of the farm's herd tests from January 2016 through to September 2016. And as you can see, over the life of the project, the farmer was able to decrease somatic cell count and is on track to return to milk quality band 1. Peter's not a newcomer to herd testing. He's got more than 30 years of experience in herd recording. But in the second interview, when I asked him, well, how do you get value from having access to this information? He said, oh, I've got a really good example for you. We're able to use our herd test data to work out how we would respond to a future grass shortage. So the season wasn't looking like in the picture on the screen. And Peter forecast that he was going to have a grass shortage in another month or two. So he made the decision that he'd dry off 67 cows early. And these were all the cows that were producing less than 15 litres a day on the herd tests. And he went, if you're producing less than 15 litres a day and you're in calf, I'll put you out in the dry cow paddock. And if you're not in calf, you'll be sold. And what this did was it reduced the milking herd size, which meant suddenly there was more grass available for less mouths. And his herd production actually increased quite dramatically. And I went, okay, that's a pretty cool story. Let's see if the herd test data and the records that we've got back that up. Is there some way that we can put a dollar value on that decision that Peter was able to make? So I went, okay, the milk income's gone up for the month. Let's find that in his data, see if it was actually there. Work out, okay, he was feeding less cows. How much did he save in concentrate? He was milking less cows. So it's probably saved a bit of labour. But in order to be able to make this decision, he had access to a season's worth of herd tests. But those cows that he dried off early, what would have been the value of their milk? if Peter had kept milking them. And this is what we saw. That one decision of being able to dry off those cows early more than recouped that entire investment in herd testing for the season. So, the point here isn't whether the dollar value of that decision is $3,500 or $3,800. It's just an example of how one instance of being able to respond quickly and confidently to a challenging situation, we're able to recoup this whole investment. But the true value of having access to herd recording information is much, much greater than this, because herd test results are used many times on farms throughout the year. And recent tech advances, like having smartphone versions of software programs, help make this data much more accessible for farmers. They've got more opportunities to turn this data into useful information and decisions on farm. In the final interview, I asked all the participating focus farms, did having access to herd test data, has it influenced your profitability? And every single one of those farms said yes. Ruth said, well, I think that herd testing is an important tool as part of managing a business and improving your profitability. When Guy and I were chatting about this idea in our final interview, we were talking about how the next season, 16-17 season, was likely to be pretty tough, and how every cow has to be paying away. And he said, you don't need to be carrying too many hitchhikers. And the only way you can identify the real hitchhikers is to herd test. So when it comes down to this, is cow production data valuable? Every single focus farm gave me numerous examples of how they got value from this data. And I feel like we've really only scratched the surface today in going through a couple of those ways that they're able to access value from the information, both as a tool to support a whole range of routine management decisions and to be able to respond quickly and confidently to curveballs. And there's no doubt that the 2015-16 season definitely threw a few of those. Because each focus farm has a slightly different approach to how they chose to use the results, I don't think it's possible to come up with a single dollar value on the benefit of having this data. And I think I'd struggle to get participants for a project if you said, for the next year, record every single time you use your herd test results and what you're using them for. I think the best indicator that we've got that the focus farms found this information valuable is that Improving Herds stopped paying for the herd test 12 months ago. So as part of the project, we paid for them. And 6 out of 7 of the focus farms have continued to herd test since then. And the 7th herd plans to start up again once their transition to A2 milk is finalised. The farmer got something for free. When he suddenly had to pay for it, all of those focus farms were happy to pay for the herd test themselves. I think that's a really good indication that all 7 of the focus farms have found value from having access to individual cow production data. A project like this isn't possible without the support of the focus farms and herd test centres. So I'd just like to acknowledge them, and also Jenny Price, who leads the Improving Herds project, Michelle Axford from DataGene, and Ruth Nettle at the University of Melbourne, who had a really integral role in collating these masses of interview information, financial data, and individual cow data into this story that you've heard today. And if you'd like to stay up to date with what's happening with the Improving Herds project, you can email us at improvingherds@gardnerfoundation.com. Thanks very much, Nico.
Thank you, Joe, for such a fantastic presentation. I think it was really, really good, very, very clear. And I think as you highlighted at the end, the fact that 6 out of the 7 farmers are still herd testing and paying them from their pockets shows that there is value in that. There have been a couple of questions, and if there's any more, just feel free to keep coming, the questions, but I'll ask some that came through. How did you select the 7 farms that participated in the project?
So the 7 farms that took part, it was the responsibility of the herd test centres that were involved in the project to identify a suitable farm in their region.
Excellent, perfect. The second question is, how often did you herd test these 7 farms? And was there any support network around the farmer other than the herd test center to help them interpret the data and see how can they improve the management?
So the frequency of herd testing varied a little bit from farm to farm. So, you know, some of the herds that milk year round, they went for sampling every 2 months. And then the more seasonal herds went for every 4 to 6 weeks. In regards to the support that the focus farms received, each herd test centre had a facilitator who was the first point of contact for that focus farm, and it was the facilitators who provided, for example, computer support with learning a new software program, and the herds all had the opportunity to have staff from the herd test centre come out to the dairy on herd test day, and that was paid, those staff were paid for through the project.
Perfect, excellent. Yeah, excellent answer.
That was both the question?
Yeah. Oh, I guess so, at least. The third question that somebody asked is, a lot of around the data is knowing what to ask the data to help take informed decisions. Did the farmers establish objectives before they started the projects or at the beginning on what things they wanted to work at, or this facilitator kind of facilitated the discussions on what to look at in the data?
Sorry, what was the actual question there, Nico? It was quite.
I think the question, I don't know what exactly they meant, but I guess it means, did the farmers establish an objective, for example, take better culling decisions or target dry cow treatment or dropping low performance or whatever at the beginning of the project, or those examples that you gave at the beginning of the individual farms doing different things, did those things occur naturally throughout the project?
So when I did my first interview with each of the focus farmers, and at this point they'd all done 1 or 2 herd tests, part of that experience was discussing what their breeding goals were and what their goals were at, you know, the farm level and investment plans, and getting an understanding of that. And then we talked about, well, before you had the herd test data, how are you making progress towards those goals, and how can you do that differently now that you have access to the herd test data? But I do know that quite often the facilitators for the focus farms would go back out after the herd test, especially in the first couple of tests, to make sure that the farmers could access their results. And the two users of the Maestro software program, they said that they'd had some really good support in having someone come out and show them how they could generate reports like the next batch of cows to dry off based on calving dates and that sort of thing.
Excellent. The next question is, where do you think the farmers found the biggest surprise of things they didn't know, or the changes to the management now that they have access to information? Was it on different level of cow production? Was it in somatic cell count?
Definitely at the first interview, there was this real surprise from the focus farms in, yeah, like I couldn't believe it when the boss said that that's what our top performing cow was, or, you know, she's this great big 800 kilo cow, looked like a superstar, but she's only doing 5 litres a day. I think there was those, that everyone was pretty surprised in just who their best and worst cows were. And also what was really interesting, in the first round of interviews, I interviewed some of the farm staff on some of the farms. And one of the owner's daughters said to me, oh, I'd heard for years about how like awful herd testing is and how bad it's going to be, and it was nothing as bad as what I'd been led to believe by all the negative perceptions in the industry. And similarly, on the Maffra farm, their sort of main farm workers, they had recollections of how herd testing used to be, you know, 10, 15 years ago, and they said this is a much more efficient and nicer process than 10, 15 years ago.
Very good. That's interesting to hear. The last two questions is, one is, what influence did this project have around local farmers in the area, around those farmers? So did they get more farmers involved in herd testing?
So as I alluded to in the introduction, Improving Herds has both a research and an extension component. And so at the moment, we're really in that transition from research to extension. So we're planning some events and workshops for the beginning of next year to really make sure that this information gets back out into the local regions where the focus farms are all located. At the moment, the information's really only gone out through a few key conferences like Herd 17 and the Dairy Research Foundation Symposium, and some media releases and that sort of thing. So the real on-the-ground extension is still to come.
Excellent. So those two email addresses that are on the screen now at the moment, I guess, are the two main contact points to keep in touch and hear for more information.
Yeah, definitely. Improving Herds, much like you do, Nico, produce a newsletter with project updates and updates on events where you can hear about what results are coming out of the project. So if people want to stay in the loop for when field days and events are coming to their region, their best bet is to email the Improving Herds at Gardiner Foundation email.
Thank you, Joe, for that. The other question that somebody just sent is, what software do you know is available to put production and genetic data in to make use of the data?
Look, I'm not an expert in the software side of things, Nico, so I might actually have to handball that question to the herd test centres themselves or DataGene.
So and that was another question that came through. How do you see this space evolving around DataGene and the integration with the app that Dairy Australia has? Like, is it part of this project to involve kind of this data into the use of those type of platforms?
Yes, yeah. As you can see, DataGene is they're one of the partners in the Improving Herds project, and so they're very involved in, particularly now as we move into the research. Move from the research phase into the extension and delivery part of the project.
Excellent. I know there's a section on Dairy Australia's website that has information on software, and there's a link to DataGene there. So I think that probably does not answer 100% of that question, but can help that person kind of point them towards somewhere where there could be more information.
Yeah.
So I think that's all. There's no more questions for the moment, Joe. So I do really want to thank you once again for your time. I think it has been a fantastic presentation. I definitely enjoyed it, and I think the fact that a lot of the people have come back with a lot of questions is that there is an interest in getting that back. So I do want to congratulate you for for the project and the information that you are collecting this project, and I really look forward to what the extension part of all this project can be, because I think it is a huge amount of information that is going to be very, very valuable to the industry, and I look close to see how that space evolves with a lot of the knowledge there. So I do want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Nico, for the opportunity to share some of our work today, and thanks to everyone for listening in and having all those great questions for me at the end as well.
Thank you, Joe, very much. So as with all our webinars, this webinar has been recorded and will become available on the New South Wales DPI Dairy website. We have also a New South Wales DPI Dairy Facebook page, which is followed by more than 800 people from all around the world, and a newsletter that Joe just mentioned, which is sent out regularly to more than 450 subscribers. So please feel free to follow these two initiatives to stay updated on all the work that we do in the areas of precision dairy farming, and it is a very exciting time to be around. So for more information, I encourage all of you to visit the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries website, where you will be able to access tools and resources about the dairy industry. There is a specific section on precision dairy farming, which includes a lot of information, not only on robotic milking, but also on precision dairy farming, and this webinar will be on that website. So once again, thank you all very much for joining today, and I hope to see you next time.